Hey everyone, it's Erin Sorensen with Hail Varsity. I am joined by Greg Smith, also of Hail Varsity, and we are here to break down Nebraska's win over Purdue, 37-27. Greg, getting a little bit I was getting nervous there in the fourth quarter. It was getting a little bit dicey. How are you feeling?
I mean, I'd be lying if I said I didn't get a little bit nervous as well. But the one thing that I kept thinking throughout the game, as as a lot of random things happen in this game, that Nebraska kept coming back. They kept finding a way to keep it pushing, keep going. And you heard that a lot in the post-game comments as well about that was kind of the theme of the week. So that made sense based on what we saw during the game. But yeah, I think I'd be lying to say that I didn't feel a little bit nervous as the game tightened up towards the end.
And it was getting a little bit, so just like this game, there was a lot of penalties. And it wasn't just a lot of penalties on Nebraska. The big joke was a Nebraska opponent was finally called for holding. But Nebraska had 9 penalties for 107 yards. Purdue had 11 penalties for 126 yards. I mean, it was a very highly penalized game. What did you there's one thing I want to comment on because I want to ask you about and want your comment on. There was one call on Caleb Tanner that is a little bit, maybe or maybe not. He was basically called for trash talking. What were your thoughts on that?
I hated that. I absolutely hate that. I do not like I don't want to say under any circumstance because you never know. People say crazy stuff. But I don't like trash talk. The penalties, we get 15-yard personal fouls for that. The Deontay Williams one, hey, they had already kind of been warning him. It was on the same play. The Deontay Williams one, they've been warning him. He needed to watch it. But flagging Cam for trash talk seems a little weak. I just don't like that at all. But you're right.
Caleb, was it Caleb or was it Cam? They said two.
I'm sorry. It was
Caleb.
Caleb.
I'm glad that you said that because Cam was right there too. And I was getting really nervous with the three of them because it was like Deontay Williams, like literally put Rondale Moore on the bench. Like he's like, here, let me put you on the bench. And then you had Cam Taylor-Britt sort of in the mix and then Caleb Tanner as well. And like, I honestly didn't know what they were calling Caleb for at first because I was like, he's just in the middle of this.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I just thought he was just kind of over there and maybe the camera missed something completely. But it looked like it was just trash talk. It was interesting, though, that the camera followed him to the sideline and showed him talking to Frost. Whatever he said to Frost, it looked like it calmed Frost down a little bit. So I guess that's good. We'll have to see.
He did pat him on the helmet. Like,
yeah, he patted it on the helmet. And maybe it was a situation where he was like, look, coach, I was trying to go over there and help my teammate because he was over there stuck in their bench. Maybe that's what he got away from. But the penalties came in bunches today, right? Like there were just a lot of them. And it seemed like they all happened on the same couple of drives, at least when they were for Nebraska, because Nebraska went a long time, especially offensively, without getting one.
Yeah, it was a rough day. Everybody was definitely flag happy. There was a lot of jokes being made about that on Twitter. The one thing that does stand out when you look at the stats, Nebraska's defense held Purdue to -2 rushing yards. What did you take away from Nebraska's defense today?
I think that if Nebraska was going to be successful in today's game, it's weird to say this based on how Purdue plays, but they were going to have to stop the run well. I didn't think it would be -2 yards. Like, I don't know if you go into any game expecting that. Just because of how much Purdue likes to throw the football, how good they are throwing the football because of that trio of wide receivers that they have with Moore, Milton, and David Bell. And so you have to make them one-dimensional to be able to have a really good chance of slowing their offense down. Nebraska did a really good job, obviously, of stopping their rushing attack. But I also thought that Nebraska did a really good job outside of the one kind of weird freak play where the players ran into each other of corralling Moore and David Bell a lot and doing a really good job of not letting them get yards after the catch. So I thought those two things, stopping the run, limiting Yak, were two huge things for Nebraska's defense to do.
Yeah, and it's really interesting for me when you look at the total, like the game comparison. The total yards actually is not that different between the two. Nebraska had 364 total yards of offense. Purdue had 332. So obviously Purdue was pretty efficient as far as passing is concerned, which, you know, like you said, they definitely made Purdue one-dimensional. And so that by taking away an element of Purdue's offense, regardless of what the overall total yards came down to, it did change the outcome by eliminating one side of it. The thing, though, that that has really stuck with me is Derek Peterson wrote a story this week on Cam Jurgens where he talked with some former Nebraska players. And something that just really stood out to me in that piece was the comment about how Nebraska is just not a team that can make mistakes right now. They are not a team that can make mistakes and win. They do not have that like cushion where if you have a bad snap or you have too many penalties or you have one more penalty than the other team, that it's going to allow for them to win. So it really did feel like, at least to me, so I'm curious what your thoughts are. It felt like Nebraska was sort of playing the game of not necessarily needing to be perfect, just not allowing little mistakes to take them out of this, because they would not have had that cushion if those little mistakes had added up. And Purdue obviously made enough of their own as well. But Nebraska kind of came out on the other end of just fewer mistakes, even if there were some.
Right. Yeah. You know what? I think it kind of goes back to the very first thing I started off saying, which was even with those mistakes that Nebraska made, it felt like they weren't going to let those completely deter them. Right. I think that we're now back-to-back games where Nebraska has had multiple penalties or things go wrong within a drive, but they still found a way to end up putting points on the board. Like, that's something that we had not really been seeing from this team over the last few years, right? So if they can start to do that, to then pair with the times that they score when they have good drives and everything goes well, which they did have a couple of times happen today as well, then you can start to get something. And that's how you go from, oh, they're only scoring 20 or 22 points a game, to, hey, maybe they can get into 30. That it's just a difference, or one or so drives with like one touchdown and a field goal, right? And so it's those little things and that little margin for error that can really add up, especially given, like we've seen, Nebraska's been in so many one-score games over the last 3 years. And I think that being a point of emphasis to make sure that you bounce back from those things, because they're going to happen in a football game. You're not going to completely eliminate them, at least the stage of program building that Nebraska's at right now. So you're just going to have to find a way to overcome them. And they were doing that successfully today.
Yeah, I thought they also did a nice job of actually adjusting after halftime.
Mhm.
That first drive right after halftime was going to be so key, because Purdue was starting to find some momentum toward the end of the first half. And that kind of felt like the story of today, is that whenever Purdue was finding some momentum, Nebraska was sort of finding a way to put an end to that momentum. And I think that first drive of the second half was really, maybe not at the moment, but in hindsight now, was more of a statement in the fact that Nebraska has struggled coming out of halftime. And this was going to be a drive in which they're going to come out and get points on the board and really sort of set the stage for the rest of that half and the rest of the game. But I also found it interesting that Frost said that they came into this game expecting to play both Adrian Martinez and Luke McCaffrey. That was the plan, was to play them both. And while they did play them both, the time that Luke McCaffrey came in, he actually only came in because Adrian was getting his shoulder looked at. So something was bothering Adrian's his throwing shoulder. And that meant Luke McCaffrey had to go in. And, knowing that he went in with really no plan to do so, good for Luke. I thought, great job for him in that situation, even if it wasn't perfect. But to know that that was sort of their plan, and then they saw Adrian rolling the offense really, really well, and they corrected. I thought that spoke volumes, because that's been a criticism of ours, is that Nebraska hasn't necessarily adjusted at times. So clearly they adjusted to what they saw was working. That's at least the takeaway I had. Did you feel like Nebraska was doing a better job of adjusting against Purdue than maybe they have in weeks past?
Yeah, I thought that they did a better job overall of seeing something that works and continuing to do it, right? And I think that that's something that's also been a little bit of a criticism, and I think that they go kind of hand in hand with the adjustments too, because I think that that's just something that Nebraska has just needed to do a better job of. And I do find it really interesting that they said the plan was to come in and play both quarterbacks and rotate them like they did last week against Iowa. And I think, to Adrian Martinez's credit, he played well enough to continue to stay in that game and continue having that offense rolling the way that it was, because they just looked really efficient with him out there, outside of probably just a couple of drives, right? And I think that,
Right.
going back to your point about that first drive to start the third quarter, I think that was one of the best drives that we've seen from them, definitely all season, but
I
even of
agree.
the last 3 years. And it's not even so much. There's probably been other drives where they had like a two play drive and they, hit a big play or something like that for a touchdown. But the fact that they went methodically down the field, they ran the ball well, they threw it well, they stayed on schedule. It looked like everything was working the way it was supposed to be with complementary play calling. Like I was really impressed with that drive and then the timing of it coming out of the start of the third quarter, where Nebraska has struggled mightily throughout this whole season.
To put it lightly. And I mean,
Yeah,
this
like
this game, and we, going forward, we have no idea if Nebraska is going to have another game of this regular season. The game with Minnesota is sort of up in the air depending on COVID-19 protocols with the Minnesota team. We know that they've had some issues, so we really don't know what to expect over the next week. But for right now, it was nice to see Dedrick Mills back in the lineup for Nebraska. I think having him back definitely added a layer that Nebraska desperately needed. Wan'Dale Robinson, in my opinion, looked more like Wan'Dale Robinson than we have seen at many times over this season. He definitely was, he looked like the receiver that they wanted him to be. And I think, when you have someone like Dedrick back in the lineup and allowing to take some of that pressure off of Wan'Dale to have to be everything, he sort of was allowed to be exactly what they wanted. So I thought Wan'Dale looked great. And I mean, Adrian's stat line today, 23, he was 23 of 30 for 242 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions. I mean, that's about as good as you can ask of someone in his situation, especially knowing he had lost the job, earned the job back. If Nebraska plays Minnesota next Saturday, at least in my opinion, Adrian has solidified that job. It's his. I don't believe that you can go into that week. Maybe they'll say it, oh, we're going to give both guys just for giggles, but there's no way that you take that job from Adrian at this point. I think today really solidified for him that he can efficiently run this offense as long as things are, he still has work to do, but he really showed something, in my opinion, against Purdue that we had been hoping to see many times over this season.
Yeah, but I think just like Wan'Dale and how this had been building with Wan'Dale to have kind of this true breakout game, even though he didn't get into the end zone. And a few people mentioned on Twitter that was really unfortunate based on how he played, and I agree.
He got so close. I mean, he was so vital. Think of
So
it like
close.
he was with the assist.
Yeah, right.
Assists
And
matter.
I think that Adrian is a lot in the same way that the game that Adrian played today started with how he played against Iowa, because he played very well against Iowa. It just didn't look like the completion percentage was there, but the overall stats just were not. And I think that this was a nice step forward. And it's really both of their games, and really a big key to their offense is how well Wan'Dale and Adrian play, right? Because they're probably their two best playmakers. And so those two continuing to find their rhythm and come into their own and gaining confidence is a huge boost for this offense. And it's really weird when you mentioned, like, if they get a chance to play this game against Minnesota, think about now. I think one of the things this week will be, you always hope that they get a chance to play because people just like watching Husker football. But with them starting to gain momentum, maybe knock on wood, like you're really going to want them to get that game to see if they can continue that going. Now, that being said, I'll put this out there. You do not want the team to necessarily feel like, oh, we've arrived or anything like that.
Right, because that's Illinois week all over again.
Yeah, we're not doing that all over again, hopefully, if you're them. But there's some really encouraging signs that are happening right now.
Now, we don't want to take too much time because we understand everyone, has their days to get on with. So I understand we haven't spent a lot of time talking about the defense, but I do want to just add, if you're somebody who's going, hey, Greg, Erin, we want more on the defense, I encourage you to go bookmark hillvarsity.com. I know there are pieces coming specifically on the defense who I would say stepped up like they have many times this season when they needed it most. That defense hasn't been perfect all season, but they certainly have done what they've needed in a lot of key moments, and that was definitely the story of the defense again against Purdue. So if you're like, more defense talk, please go to hailvarsity.com. I promise it will be there. If it's not there when you head there, it will be there soon. I believe Brandon Vogel is looking at the defense, so please head that way, because I want to touch on a different, totally separate subject before I let you go. About, oddly enough, in the middle of this game, everything's coming up roses for Nebraska, and they get a decommit in the middle of this game. Actually, it was about a fourth of the way through the game. What can you tell us about that really quick, and what Husker fans should know?
Yeah, so the game was actually 17-0 when that happened. Nebraska was winning.
Just wasn't good enough. Wasn't good
enough, I guess. No, I think Patrick Payton decommitted, the high 3-star, low 4-star outside linebacker from Miami, Florida. I think that if there was one guy that was in this recruiting class that people kind of had their eye on, that was someone that was a little bit of a soft commit, it would have been him. It is, and then you kind of add on to the fact that two players that were at his high school last year, Marcus Fleming and Ronald Delancey III, have since come to Lincoln and departed rather quickly. I think that you could kind of read the tea leaves there. I do not think that this took Nebraska by a huge surprise, though they obviously wanted to keep him in the class because he is a dynamic player and pass rusher. But some of the local schools have really turned up the heat on him. I know Miami is recruiting him really hard at this point as well. It's a tough break, but better to have this happen now with a couple weeks to early signing day, and having some of kind of the signs beforehand, than to have it be like a Fleming or Delancey situation where you get here and say, ooh, that's not for me, and then leaving a hole on the roster actively. So yeah, I think, it's tough, but it's something that can be overcome.
Well, I will say, if anyone is interested, I would probably bookmark hailvarsity.com. It seems like potentially good news is coming down the pipeline, especially because we are getting closer to the early signing period. So a lot of news is on its way. I encourage you to, like I said, bookmark hailvarsity.com. Make sure that you follow Greg. You're at Greg Smith HV on Twitter. He will have all of your recruiting news and updates. You can definitely stick with him as we get closer to the early signing period and beyond, because it sounds like every time there's some bad news, there's usually some good news that follows. So you just never know. You can also follow me at Erin Sorensen. I won't have the recruiting insight, so just fair warning, but I do have some good gifts that I can dole out here and there. But yeah, we do appreciate you spending a little bit of your time post-game with us. We will be around on hailvarsity.com and on any of our social channels to continue breaking this game down, especially as we prepare for what may or may not be a home senior day for Nebraska against Minnesota. Who knows? We'll know soon enough, but we definitely don't know what's happening at this point. So enjoy the win, Husker fans. We'll be back, I guess, Monday. Well, no. We're here always at Hail Varsity. We don't go anywhere. We're always here, but we'll hear from the team again starting Monday. So again, thanks for joining us. Again, we'll talk to you soon.